Welcome to Pique Your Interest, your go-to podcast for all things mortgage and real estate. Hosted by Tanner Greenwald and Tim Malaskis. We bring you expert insights to help you buy, sell, and invest with confidence. Let's dive in.
Welcome back to Pique Your Interest podcast. I am Tanner Greenwald with the Greenwald team here at First Home Mortgage.
And I am Tim Malaskis. I am a loan officer here at our Millersville branch.
Today's episode, we're going to be talking about seller financing, or better known as seller concession. What is it? What does it look like when you're asking for it? What can you use seller concessions on? All that good stuff. So seller help, seller credit, seller financing, whatever. When you're out and about with a real estate agent and you're looking to put in a contract for something or a home, part of that is you're saying, here's the amount that I'm willing to offer on this house. But you can also ask for seller concessions on the back end. There are different maximum amounts depending on your loan type that you can ask for, kind of thing. And just to kind of give you an example of that. So if you're pre-qualified to go FHA, the max amount of seller help that you can ask for is 6%. So the seller cannot give more than 6% of the sales price to you in seller concession. Conventional, the max is 3% unless you're putting more money down. So if you're putting more money down going conventional, the minimum is 3%. But let's say you put 10% down, 15%, 20%, that maximum amount of seller help, that does go up. So it increases. But if you're putting the minimum down of 3%, then 3% is what you can get back. USDA, so if you're looking to purchase in a rural area, that is also 6% as the max seller help. VA is 4%. So if you're a veteran and you've got a VA loan, 4% is the max. And then investment properties. So if you're looking, to purchase an investment property, the maximum is 2% on that. Yeah. But seller help is literally just the seller saying, sure, we're agreeing to give you some type of concession to put towards the loan situation, and we don't expect this money back. So Getting it is awesome.
It is.
Yeah. So what can you use seller help for? Tim is going to explain that to us.
Yeah. So I think, when Tanner and I were talking about this episode and, how we should frame it, what we should talk about, it was kind of interesting because a year ago, maybe even 6 months ago, I don't know, just go back any period of time. At any point in the last 4 years, this has probably not been a topic at all because you haven't been able to get closing cost help because the market has just been so in favor of sellers. Mm-hmm. It's swinging back a little bit. It's not a buyer's market, I wouldn't say, but it's swinging more toward that way. So now the buyer has a little bit of power. So you're doing things like you can get a home inspection, you can negotiate repairs, you can ask for closing cost help. And so I think, we thought it was an appropriate time to have this episode because we're now starting to talk about getting seller help or seller concessions again, which is a conversation we haven't really had that much over the last couple of years. So what can it be used for? It could be used for pretty much anything except your down payment. And so it's things like, like some of the closing costs that you have or prepaid items. So if you're a first-time buyer, you don't have a ton of money saved up, you've got just enough for a down payment, a little bit more for the closing costs, but you don't quite have enough to cover everything, you can ask the seller to pay for that. And so that's things like, title fees or, title insurance or documentary stamps and transfer taxes, starting an escrow account, prepaying taxes and prepaying homeowners insurance and things like that. So that's one of the uses for seller help for sure. And in that, it's also included, in some loan types, like if you're doing a conventional loan, one of the fun things you can do with mortgage insurance is you could prepay it at closing, sort of pay it as a closing cost in a one-time lump sum as opposed to monthly. And you can use seller help to help pay for that, which is pretty cool. You can also use it to buy down the interest rate. Mm-hmm. So people talk about, hey, what are the rates today? What they really mean is what is the free rate? What's the rate that I'm paying that I don't have to pay for? Lately that rate's been a lot higher than what most people have been accustomed to hearing. And so one of the things that, we sort of talk to a lot of people about nowadays is what it looks like to buy a lower interest rate. Let's say, rates are at 7% and you feel more comfortable with a payment around like 6.5%. Well, you can probably get there. You just have to pay for it. And you can use the seller's money to help lower your interest rate, which, not only helps you, out of pocket because you're not coming up with that money, but it also helps you monthly because you end up with a lower payment. So you're paying less in interest, more toward principal. Long term, it's not a bad use of that money. Yeah. You could also use it for some non-traditional things, like you could use it for paying for a home warranty. Mm-hmm. That's kind of a popular one. It's becoming a little bit more popular these days. Essentially, just a home warranty is you are buying, a package that's going to take care of some of the things that could go wrong in your house. And so you pay a yearly premium for that. So the first year is usually collected at closing. If that's the case, you're getting closing cost help. That money could go toward paying for the home warranty, which is also pretty nice because that'll save you some money out of pocket. Sometimes closing costs are negotiated into the contract. And in the very beginning, I'm offering you $300,000. I want 3% back in closing cost help to pay some of my closing costs. Sometimes it doesn't come into play until later on in the transaction where you've already had a home inspection. There are a few things you want repaired and the seller doesn't really want to repair those things. And so you say, okay, well, you don't have to repair those things, but give me a credit for that. And I'll take care of doing that after the fact. And so, an addendum is drafted to the contract that says, now we're going to be getting, 3% closing cost help or whatever the cost is. And so you can essentially use that money for those future repairs that are going to be needed.
I feel like that's another reason to get a home inspection. Just noting that in there.
Well, it is definitely becoming more of a thing, right? Mm-hmm. Like you are able to get home inspections now. You're able to negotiate repairs. You're able to even walk away from the contract based on what your results are. So, again, not quite there, but swinging more in favor of buyers, which is really nice. Mm-hmm. There are things you can't use it for, though. What might some of those things be?
Well, as you mentioned previously, so your down payment, unless you're going through like a program, which does help for like down payment and helping you pay your portion of that. Seller concessions, you are not allowed to use for your down payment. You as the client have to make sure that you bring your full down payment. So that's one thing that you're not able to use seller concessions for. You can use it for the closing costs, like Tim had mentioned before, but not your down payment. Yeah. Principal reduction, you can't pay your principal down with seller concessions. That has to come, it's just as part of the loan. That's one thing you cannot pay down with it. And then paying down debt. So unless you are a veteran going a VA loan type, you cannot pay down debt to qualify or help yourself qualify for a loan. So sometimes, when Michelle and I were going through a person's loan application and their debt to income ratio is kind of creeping up there to the maximum. Some things we think about doing are, okay, well, let's see if they can pay down some of their debt that they have. Multiple times we've gotten the question of, well, we got seller concessions as a part of our contract, or can we pay down the debt with that? You can't, unless you're VA. If you're VA, you can. Otherwise, you cannot. So you have to make sure that you know that. So what are the benefits of requiring seller help?
The biggest one, right? Like is you need a lot less money at closing, which is really nice. Yeah. I think especially for first-time buyers, because a lot of people are, down payment and closing costs challenged because it's expensive to buy a house, right? Like it's hard to save money in an inflationary environment. It's hard to save up enough for a down payment. It's hard to save up enough for all the closing costs that you have. A lot of first-time buyers don't even know what the minimum down payment is or how much closing costs are, and so
or how much to have saved.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so it's hard to save money, in the world that we're living in now. So, for the seller, it's easier because the seller has built up this equity over the time of owning the house. And God, if you've owned a house in the last 4 years, like you're sitting on a ton of equity, or at least it's very likely you're sitting on a ton of equity. And so if you have that money, it's easier for you to give that money to the buyer than it is for the buyer to save that money because, you have that money as the seller. As the buyer, it's going to take you, months or maybe even years to save up enough money. So the benefit is you come out of pocket with a lot less money, which is something that I think would benefit just about every first-time home buyer that I work with. Yeah, who doesn't want to spend less money, right? But it's also, the money that they give you toward closing costs is not a loan. It's not something that you pay back. Now, maybe you could technically say you're paying for it because the sales price is higher. Maybe you offered a little bit more money on the house so that the seller could pay your closing costs. But at the end of the day, you likely wouldn't be in the house without the seller giving you that closing cost help, and you're not physically giving that money back. So, maybe you pay a few extra bucks a month on a mortgage payment, but you got into the house and you now have the ability to start reaping the benefit of owning a home and building equity and things like that. For the seller though, it's if you have the ability to give closing cost help, I think it opens the door, literally and figuratively, to more buyers being able to buy your house. Yeah. If you're a seller and you don't have a lot of equity and you don't have the ability to give that, not every buyer is going to be able to buy your house because not every buyer is going to have the funds set aside for the down payment and all of the closing costs and all the things that go along with buying a house. And so if you're a seller and you have the ability to give closing cost help, I think it makes your market, your house more marketable, makes it more attractive, and I think you become more of a viable option for the buyers.
Yeah.
I just think it can work for both parties. And ideally, like, that's what a negotiation is, right? Like, you get something you want, I get something that I want, and we both walk away from the transaction happy.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, I feel like it almost kind of speeds the process of your house being on the market up. Like,
yeah. It should.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you have the ability to do it, it's definitely helps buyers look at your house more favorably, for sure.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So what are we seeing out there with closing cost help? What kind of trends are you seeing?
So obviously we're seeing more of it. So I feel like from 2020, maybe even up until the beginning of this year, like you mentioned, there was absolutely no seller help being accepted on any contracts. In fact, I think if you wrote a contract and you asked for seller help, you immediately got thrown out.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it's understandable. If the market's not doing that, why would they give that to you?
Well, there's 12 offers on the same house.
Right.
You're the only one that needs closing cost help.
They're probably going to be picking somebody else.
Yeah.
But you're seeing it way more. I'm seeing it a lot more this year, at least with the loans that we're bringing in. I had a specific loan that was FHA, and they got a full 6% seller help, which it ended up being a nice chunk of change that this client was able to, put towards their transaction. And literally all they had to bring to the table was a portion of their down payment because they also were going through a program. So, I mean, it was a really awesome setup for them. So the fact that we're seeing more seller help out in the market and it being accepted by sellers, I think it opens up a door for buyers to be more aggressive, I think, to go out and house hunt, because it was it's hard. If you know the market is tough out there and you're going out there and you're putting in offers, you're getting discouraged with each offer that gets declined. So I feel like the fact that seller help is back into the market and being accepted, it allows our borrowers to keep shopping and for a longer period of time. Yeah. Because I feel like during COVID, we had a lot of buyers that were like, we give up. We've seen 10 to 15 houses. We're done. I don't want to put in any more offers. And it was harsh on us, I feel like.
Yeah. So. Well, I mean, in previous episodes, we've talked about buyer fatigue. There are a lot of people out there that just got so tired of not winning. And so, you get your heart set on, because buying a house is an emotional thing. And we talked about the psychology of home buying before. It's emotional. You see a house, you like it, you fall in love with it, you got to have it, and you don't get it because there's 20 offers on the same house and yours wasn't the best.
Yeah.
And so we're not quite seeing that anymore. There's still multiple offer situations, but it's definitely shifting a little bit. And as we said, there's the ability to get closing cost help. So if you're the kind of person that's, hasn't looked at buying a house, or you kind of put off buying a house at one point because it wasn't what you thought it was going to be, it was more expensive than you thought, or you just didn't have enough money saved, or you didn't feel comfortable, now might be a good time to get back into the market, because you can get closing cost help. I mean, it's not guaranteed, right? You still have to negotiate it, but it's at least it's a talking point that didn't really exist a year or more ago. So if that's the reason you were avoiding the market is because I don't have enough money saved to buy a house, was your reasoning, you might find that that's not the case anymore. Yeah,
I agree. No, I totally agree.
Yeah.
Do you have an example of somebody who's recently gotten seller help accepted as part of their offer?
So 2 months ago, I had a VA client, wrote an offer, got accepted. They requested 4% closing cost help. The closing costs weren't quite 4%, so there was a little bit of money left over. They had a little bit of a balance on a credit card, and so we were able to use that extra closing cost help. I think it was only like $500 or $600, but that's $500 or $600 that was paid down on their credit card that didn't come out of their own pocket.
Yeah.
And so, you walk away from the transaction with just about no money out of pocket. You get keys to a house, and your credit card balance is already lower.
Yeah.
It's pretty much like the most perfect situation you could have come up with in that scenario.
Yeah, well, it's funny that you say having a little bit of leftover. So that happens sometimes. Yeah. Like if you are given the full 6%, 4%, whatever amount, and there is some leftover. Tim mentioned previously that you could purchase home warranties and stuff like that. So Michelle and I have done that when we've had clients come in and they're under contract, get seller help, and we have some funding left over from that. We don't like to just let that go. That's money, that's gold, So how else can we use that in a way where it's, sticking with compliance and all that stuff, and purchasing a home warranty if you're a veteran, paying off your debt, I think those are good examples to just share.
Yeah, there are definitely some very creative, but legal, obviously, things that you can do with that money. And if you can benefit somebody with the use of those funds, whether it's paying for a home warranty or paying down debt, if you're putting somebody in a better position and they're becoming a homeowner, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So all this to say, don't be afraid to ask or talk to your realtor about asking for seller help. It is being accepted out there right now. You might not get every bit of seller help that you're asking for, but to me, anything is better than nothing, especially.
Yeah, definitely. If it's coming out of somebody else's pocket.
Oh, yeah. I'm like, how can we eat up this seller help? Anyway, so that's what we have for seller concessions, seller help, seller credit, seller financing, all that good stuff. If you found this interesting and you have questions or suggestions or just something to note on, obviously let Tim and I know.
Yeah.
Otherwise, go out there and don't be afraid to ask for seller help.
Go get it.
Go get it. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.